Inside your skull, your brain is in complete darkness. The only thing it ever sees are electrical and chemical signals. But that's all it needs to perform its two basic functions. First, it recognizes electrochemical patterns sent from your sense organs. And second, it creates new patterns, output patterns, that are sent to your muscles, say, to contract. The brain doesn't care what the data is or where it comes from. It just finds patterns. That's its sole purpose. Pattern recognition is the basis of our perception of the outside world. Sense organs pick up on the things going on around us, but they're limited to a certain range. The human eye can only detect certain wavelengths of light. Visible light is only a small sliver of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. This is why we can't see X-rays. Our ears are only sensitive to certain frequencies, which is why we can't hear a dog whistle. And our noses can only detect the shapes of certain molecules, which is why natural gas is completely odorless. This sliver of information we have about the world is what constructs our perspective on everything. So the reality our minds construct is limited by our biology. But so are our movements. The body determines what we are physically capable of, and our mind controls our muscles. The cycle of sensation and movement is what makes coordination possible. The brain sends patterns of electrical signals to trigger muscle contraction. A coordinated motion requires a complex combination of these patterns. As they move, the limbs monitor their position in space relative to the body and relay it back to the brain. Our inner touch sensation is what allows us to correct our movements in real time. And using this data, we construct a library of sensory motor programs from our past experience, like falling down as a child. The more times the cycle is executed, the more coordinated that movement becomes. This cycle of signals and sensations is what allows us to walk, run, play ping pong, even fly space shuttles. But amputees, they can't do a lot of these things. This is where technology can play a vital role. Modern prosthetics attempt to recreate a part of this cycle. And this is only possible because of the remarkable ability of the brain to filter and decode information. Brain-computer interfaces are the keystone of prosthetics. They're the interface between the biology and the technology. Currently, most brain-computer interfaces are cortical implants, and they work because of the interplay of the biology and the technology. Computer interfaces are arrays of microelectrodes that are surgically implanted on the cortex of the brain. Microelectrodes measure electrical potentials, and this 2D array is used to create a map of brain activity. These cortical implants have shown promising results in recreating both the feed-forward muscle control and the feedback sensory input. Concerning the feed-forward muscle control, when an individual loses a limb, they can experience something known as phantom limb syndrome. Phantom limb syndrome is the sensation of the presence of an absent limb. In other words, they feel they have a limb that isn't even there. Many individuals with amputations even feel that they can move their missing limb, and there's a reason for that. In the absence of a limb, your brain will still send signals to control it. This is what makes prosthetic motor control possible. Intended action creates brain activity measured by the cortical implant. Each individual action is associated with a specific pattern. Say, moving your left pinky is associated with a specific pattern. Moving your thumb, a slightly different neurological pattern. Computer algorithms take the cortical implant measurements, which are interpreted and recognized as intended motions. These intended motions can then be applied to a bionic arm. The output controlling motion is only half of the cycle. For example, when you hold an egg, what allows you to know you're holding it just firm enough not to drop it, but not so firm that it breaks in your hand? Of course, it must be some sort of feedback to the brain. Now imagine the frustration of a prosthetic user who doesn't have the feedback system, and they can't hold an egg or a can without dropping or crushing it. The role of tech is to not only provide the feed-forward control of a limb, but also provide the brain with a feedback tactile sensation. Using the same cortical implant microelectrode arrays, we can stimulate portions of the brain responsible for touch. Stimulating the cortex of the brain using data provided by sensors on a prosthetic limb can create the sensation of touch. Greater pressure is a stronger signal sent to the cortical implant. Different textures create unique patterns of electrical activity. The pattern itself is inconsequential, but over time the brain learns to associate these patterns with specific textures. The upshot of tactile sensory feedback from a prosthetic limb is that users now have the dexterity to hold a can or an egg. This is the difference between a prosthetic with and without sensory feedback.
Going back for it.
Yeah, this is better because I can actually tell when I had something. And I definitely could tell when I had it.
You could?
This man is wearing a blindfold, so we must rely entirely on the prosthetic for tactile feedback. The exciting thing about sensory feedback is that it goes beyond limb loss. People who are suffering from blindness and deafness are also missing a feedback. In addition to the tactile cortex, microelectrode arrays can also be implanted on the visual cortex, which is a region at the back of the brain, responsible for sight. How it works. A video feed from a camera is fed into a computer. The computer's algorithms process each frame into a pattern of electrical signals that the brain can understand. The computer then sends these signals wirelessly through the skull to the cortical implant, which stimulates the visual cortex. By simulating data from a biological eye, visual prosthetics can provide rudimentary sight. Over time, people can even learn to read large print. It's hard to imagine what it would be like to see for the first time, but for this individual, it was life-changing.
It's the flash, and I've got to be able to interpret the changes in that shape.
That's exactly right.
Okay, let's do it again.
You're doing great.
I picked you up. Oh.
You picked me up. God bless you.
It's crude, but it's significant. You know, it'll work.
The current state of prosthetics is truly amazing. Rapid advancements are giving hope to people who really need this technology. But there are some unavoidable concerns that society needs to consider. There are very real implications of the application of this technology. When prosthetics are capable of providing superhuman strength, should it be considered a lethal weapon? And should the very wealthy who aren't missing limbs be allowed to supplement their own biology? Digital sensor feedback can expand our sensory experience beyond what is biologically possible. For example, an infrared detector could allow you to see through ladies' clothing. Vulnerabilities in computer systems could allow someone to hijack control of a limb. If a prosthetic is then responsible for a murder, who should be held accountable? The user, the programmer, the manufacturer? And perhaps this is far out, but given that a great deal of who you are is your experience, could someone induce false sensation and memory to control your actions? In the next few years, society must address these questions. It's important to bring these questions to the public's attention as soon as possible so we have the time to address them appropriately. As with any new innovation, there are issues that need to be addressed, both technically and ethically. But that's not to understate the potential to create a better life for those unfortunate enough to need this technology. Thank you.